Most people think a happy dog is a loud dog. The tail wagging, the jumping, the excitement at the front door. But according to animal behavior researchers, some of the strongest signs that a dog's life is truly good are almost invisible unless you know what to look for. Ethan Cole didn't notice it at first because the moment itself was so quiet it almost disappeared into the middle of an ordinary night. The digital clock on the microwave read 2:13 a.m. when he walked into the living room to grab a glass of water, and that was when he saw Bailey stretched out in the middle of the rug beneath the soft yellow light above the kitchen sink. Not curled up. Not alert. Not halfway awake like usual. Completely sprawled out across the floor with his stomach exposed, one paw twitching slightly in his sleep, his breathing deep and slow like he had forgotten the world could ever hurt him. Ethan stopped walking. For a second, he just stood there holding the edge of the counter, staring at the dog in silence. Because Bailey had never slept like that before. Not in the first week Ethan brought him home from the shelter. Not during the first winter when every sudden sound made Bailey lift his head instantly. Not even after 2 full years of living in the same apartment together. Back then, Bailey always slept close to walls or under tables, tucked tightly into himself like some part of his brain was still waiting for something bad to happen. Ethan remembered waking up some nights and finding Bailey staring toward the hallway instead of sleeping, ears slightly raised, body tense even in the dark. At the time, Ethan thought that was just part of Bailey's personality. Some dogs are anxious. Some dogs are light sleepers. Some dogs never fully relax. But now, watching Bailey sleep in the dead center of the room with all 4 legs loose and his chest rising slowly without a single ounce of tension in his body, Ethan suddenly realized something that made his throat tighten. This wasn't just sleep. This was trust. Real trust. The kind that only appears when an animal's nervous system finally decides it no longer needs to stay on guard. Scientists who study canine behavior say dogs only enter this level of vulnerable rest when their environment consistently feels emotionally safe. Not exciting. Not stimulating. Safe. Because in the wild, sleep is vulnerability. A dog that fully relaxes is a dog whose brain has stopped preparing for danger every few seconds. And standing there in the quiet glow of his apartment, Ethan realized Bailey wasn't just resting. For the first time in his life, Bailey finally looked like a dog who believed he was home. The next morning, Ethan could not stop thinking about what he had seen. Even after the coffee finished brewing and the city outside his apartment slowly came alive with traffic and distant sirens, his mind kept replaying the image of Bailey asleep in the middle of the rug like a dog who had finally put down a weight nobody else could see. Bailey lifted his head as Ethan walked into the kitchen, his eyes soft, ears relaxed, tail tapping lazily against the hardwood floor instead of exploding with frantic energy the way he used to every morning. And strangely, that tiny difference unsettled Ethan more than if Bailey had been bouncing off the walls. Because for years, Ethan believed excitement was happiness. Most people do. A dog jumping all over you when you come home feels like love. The non-stop tail wagging, the spinning in circles, the constant need for attention. It looks joyful. But what Ethan did not understand until recently was that excitement and peace are not the same thing. In fact, animal behavior researchers have found that highly anxious dogs often appear overly excited because their nervous systems struggle to settle down. Their brains stay alert even during positive moments, constantly monitoring the environment, constantly preparing for what might happen next. Ethan remembered how Bailey used to follow him from room to room without ever fully relaxing. Even while chewing on a toy, Bailey would pause every few seconds just to check where Ethan was. At first, Ethan thought it was sweet. Loyal. But now he wondered if part of it had been worry instead of attachment. That realization sat heavy in his chest as he clipped Bailey's leash on for their morning walk. Outside, the October air carried that cold sharpness that always arrives just before winter in Chicago. Leaves scraped across the sidewalk while Bailey walked beside him at an easy pace, nose drifting through the air without pulling hard against the leash. Then something happened Ethan had never seen before. Halfway through the walk, Bailey stopped near a patch of sun spilling across the grass beside an apartment building and simply laid down. Not cautiously. Not after circling 3 or 4 times like usual. He just dropped onto his side with a long exhale, and closed his eyes for a second while the sunlight warmed his fur. Ethan actually laughed quietly under his breath because the moment felt so unbelievably human. But according to canine neurologists, moments like this are not random at all. Dogs only display relaxed resting behavior in open environments, when their brains believe there is no immediate need for vigilance. It is one of the clearest signs that stress hormones are no longer dominating the nervous system. Bailey was not performing happiness. He was experiencing safety deeply enough that his body no longer felt the need to stay prepared. And for the first time, Ethan began to wonder how many dogs spend their entire lives being loved by people while still never fully feeling safe inside their own minds. That afternoon, Ethan started noticing things he had somehow missed for years, not because Bailey had suddenly changed overnight, but because once you finally understand what calm actually looks like in a dog, you begin seeing the difference everywhere. It was in the little pauses. The quiet moments most people ignore. Bailey was lying near the window while rain tapped softly against the glass, watching the movement of cars below without reacting to every sound in the hallway anymore. A few months ago, a door slamming somewhere in the building would have made his ears shoot up instantly. Sometimes he would even stand and pace for a minute before settling down again. But now, Bailey barely lifted his head before letting out another slow breath and relaxing back into the blanket beside the couch. That exhale caught Ethan's attention immediately because animal behavior experts often describe long, deep sighs and relaxed dogs as a physiological release of tension. Not exhaustion. Not boredom. Relief. The nervous system literally shifting out of alert mode. Ethan sat down quietly with his coffee and kept watching him. Bailey stretched one front leg slowly across the cushion until it rested against Ethan's thigh, then closed his eyes completely. Not halfway closed. Completely. That detail mattered more than Ethan realized. Dogs only shut their eyes fully near someone when they trust the environment enough to temporarily disconnect from monitoring it. In canine cognition studies, soft blinking and prolonged eye closure are associated with emotional safety because the dog is willingly reducing awareness of potential threats. Ethan reached down carefully and scratched behind Bailey's ear, and what happened next nearly broke his heart in the gentlest possible way. Bailey leaned into the touch without hesitation. No stiffness. No tiny flinch first. Just trust. Pure trust. Ethan suddenly remembered the first month after adopting him from the shelter 3 years earlier. Bailey used to freeze for half a second any time a hand moved too quickly near his face. Most people would never have noticed it because the reaction was so small. But now Ethan understood those tiny moments were never random personality quirks. They were stress signals. Leftover caution stored deep inside the body. Researchers who study long-term canine stress say many dogs continue carrying hypervigilance long after entering safe homes because the nervous system learns survival patterns faster than it learns peace. Safety is not something a dog hears. It is something their body slowly begins to believe after enough predictable days. And maybe that was why this moment felt so emotional to Ethan. Because Bailey was not just acting calmer. He was changing at a level deeper than behavior. His body itself was finally loosening its grip on survival. Outside, rain continued rolling softly down the windows while Bailey slept beside him with one paw still touching Ethan's leg like he needed to stay connected even in rest. And for the first time, Ethan realized that one of the quietest signs of a truly good life is when a dog no longer feels the need to stay emotionally prepared for danger that never comes. Over the next few weeks, Ethan became almost obsessed with noticing the difference between happiness that looked loud and happiness that felt real. And the more he paid attention, the more Bailey seemed to reveal things without ever making a sound. One Saturday morning, Ethan took Bailey to the small lakeside park a few miles north of downtown, the one with the cracked walking trail and rows of maple trees turning orange along the water. A year ago, outings like this used to leave Bailey overstimulated. He would pull constantly on the leash, scan every passing person, react to every skateboard, every barking dog, every sudden movement. Even after they got home, Bailey would pace around the apartment for nearly an hour before finally settling down. But now something about him felt different. Softer. More grounded. Ethan noticed it the moment they reached the grass near the lake. Bailey sniffed around for a few minutes, watched a couple throwing bread to ducks near the shoreline, then calmly wandered back and sat beside Ethan without being called. Not because he was tired. Not because he was nervous. He simply looked content being there. That subtle distinction mattered more than most people realize. According to canine behavioral studies, one of the clearest indicators of emotional stability in dogs is the ability to disengage voluntarily from stimulation. An anxious nervous system struggles to stop scanning for input. A peaceful one knows when it is safe to rest. Ethan watched Bailey carefully as a jogger passed nearby pushing a stroller. Bailey glanced up for half a second, then looked away again, completely relaxed. No stiffness. No intense monitoring. Just quiet confidence. And then Ethan noticed something else that almost made him smile to himself. Bailey had started checking in less often. In the past, Bailey constantly looked back at Ethan every few seconds during walks as if confirming he was still there. But now, Bailey explored calmly without needing that constant reassurance. Animal cognition researchers describe this as secure attachment behavior. Ironically, dogs who feel safest with their owners often appear more independent because their brains are no longer operating from fear of separation. They trust the connection enough to relax inside it. Ethan leaned back against the park bench and suddenly remembered something a trainer once told him during Bailey's first year at home. A stressed dog asks questions all day long. At the time, Ethan did not fully understand what that meant. But now he finally did. Is this safe? Are you staying? Should I worry? Do I need to prepare? Bailey used to ask those questions with every movement of his body. But sitting beside the lake that cold October morning, Bailey looked like a dog whose mind had finally gone quiet. The wind rolled gently across the water while Bailey lay down beside Ethan's boots, resting his chin against the grass with his eyes half closed. And Ethan realized something that stayed with him long after they left the park. Sometimes the most beautiful change in a dog is not becoming more excited about life. It is finally becoming calm enough to enjoy it. That night, Ethan sat alone on the floor beside the couch while an old jazz playlist drifted quietly through the apartment, and Bailey lay nearby chewing slowly on one of his favorite toys. Not obsessively. Not like before. Ethan remembered how Bailey used to destroy toys almost immediately during his first year at home, ripping at seams with frantic energy and barely pausing between movements. At the time, Ethan assumed Bailey was simply playful or high energy. But now he understood that repetitive overstimulation behaviors in dogs are often linked to unresolved stress and emotional dysregulation. Dogs whose nervous systems struggle to settle frequently engage in non-stop activity because calm itself feels unfamiliar. But tonight Bailey stopped chewing after only a few minutes, rolled onto his side, and simply rested with the toy between his paws as if he no longer needed to use movement to escape his own thoughts. Ethan looked over at him and felt something strange tighten in his chest again. Because the more peaceful Bailey became, the more Ethan started wondering what life must have felt like for him before this. He had adopted Bailey from a crowded shelter on the south side of the city after spotting him sitting silently in the back corner of a kennel, while louder dogs barked for attention around him. Bailey never barked once during the entire visit. Ethan still remembered kneeling down near the gate, while Bailey watched him carefully with those cautious amber eyes that seemed to measure every movement before deciding whether it was safe. The shelter employee told Ethan that Bailey had been returned twice in less than a year because people described him as distant and anxious. One family even complained that he never relaxed. Back then, Ethan thought love alone would fix everything quickly. Walks, treats, soft blankets, patience. He thought safety was something you could give a dog in a few weeks if your intentions were good enough. But animal psychologists say emotional recovery does not happen on a human timeline. A dog can leave a stressful environment physically long before their nervous system believes the danger is over. And suddenly Ethan realized something painful. For most of Bailey's life with him, Bailey may have been surviving safely without fully feeling safe. The apartment had always been warm. The food had always been there. Ethan had never raised his voice at him. But emotional security goes deeper than the absence of harm. It is predictability. Consistency. Knowing what tomorrow feels like before it arrives. Bailey lifted his head slightly when Ethan moved closer, then slowly placed one paw across Ethan's leg before resting again without even opening his eyes all the way. Experts in canine attachment behavior often describe physical contact initiated during relaxed states as one of the strongest indicators of emotional trust because the dog is choosing connection while fully vulnerable. Ethan rested his hand gently against Bailey's shoulder and sat there quietly for a long time while rain tapped softly against the windows again. And somewhere in the middle of that silence, Ethan finally understood that healing in dogs does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a body that no longer braces for life. Every second of the day. A few days later, Ethan noticed something that would have seemed meaningless to almost anyone else, but once he saw it, he could not stop thinking about it. He had just come home after a long shift downtown, shoulders tight from sitting in traffic for nearly an hour while cold November rain smeared across the windshield the entire drive back. Usually, when Ethan opened the apartment door, Bailey greeted him with excitement that felt almost overwhelming. Fast tail wagging. Pacing. Following him immediately from room to room as if afraid the moment would disappear. But this time was different. Bailey walked over calmly, leaned his body gently against Ethan's leg for a few seconds, then quietly returned to his bed near the window and laid back down with a slow blink. At first, Ethan actually felt a tiny sting of disappointment. It was such a human reaction. Part of him missed the explosive greetings because they felt like proof of love. But then he remembered something he had read from a canine behavioral specialist earlier that week. Dogs who are deeply secure with their owners often stop treating departures and arrivals like emotional emergencies. Their nervous systems trust the pattern. You leave. You come back. Nothing bad happens. The relationship remains stable. And suddenly Bailey's calmness felt more meaningful than excitement ever had. Ethan set his keys on the kitchen counter and watched Bailey resting quietly while the sound of rain filled the apartment again. There was no tension in him anymore. No frantic checking. No restless pacing waiting for the next cue from the world. Bailey looked like a dog who finally believed tomorrow would probably be okay. That thought stayed in Ethan's mind the entire evening. Later that night, he sat on the couch scrolling absent-mindedly through old photos on his phone while Bailey slept nearby. The older pictures almost hurt to look at now. In nearly every image from the first year, Bailey's body looked subtly guarded even when he appeared happy. Mouth slightly tight. Eyes always alert. Muscles never fully loose. Ethan realized something uncomfortable then. Humans are incredibly good at recognizing obvious suffering in dogs, but terrible at noticing quiet stress. If a dog cries, hides, or reacts dramatically, people pay attention. But when stress becomes a dog's normal baseline, most owners simply call it personality. Energetic. Clingy. Intense. Sensitive. Meanwhile, the dog's nervous system may have been stuck in survival mode for years. Researchers studying canine cortisol patterns have found that chronically stressed dogs often struggle to achieve deep physiological rest even in safe homes because the body becomes addicted to vigilance. Safety starts to feel unfamiliar. Bailey shifted slightly in his sleep beside the couch, one back leg twitching softly while his breathing remained deep and steady. Ethan smiled faintly because he remembered how rare that used to be. For the longest time, Bailey barely seemed capable of fully letting go, even during sleep. But now his body moved freely through dreams without interruption, without sudden wakefulness, without tension pulling him back to alertness every few minutes. And maybe that was the real transformation Ethan had been witnessing all along. Bailey was not becoming a different dog. He was becoming the dog he might have been from the very beginning if life had always felt safe enough to simply exist without fear. One Sunday afternoon, Ethan invited his younger sister Claire over to the apartment for coffee, and the moment she walked through the door, she stopped mid-sentence and looked down at Bailey with genuine surprise. "He is so different now," she said quietly. Ethan looked over at Bailey lying near the balcony door, sunlight stretching across his golden-brown fur while he watched the city below with calm half-closed eyes. Claire was right. Even the atmosphere around him felt different. Softer somehow. Lighter. Claire crouched down to pet him, and Bailey greeted her gently before settling back onto the floor without tension or excitement exploding through his body. A year ago, visitors used to overwhelm him. He would hover constantly nearby, unable to decide whether to seek attention or retreat from it. Ethan remembered how hard Bailey used to work just to regulate himself around normal life. Every sound mattered too much. Every routine change lingered in his body for hours. But now Bailey seemed capable of something Ethan once thought only humans experienced. Peace. Later that afternoon, after Claire left, Ethan found himself sitting quietly at the kitchen table reading more about canine neuroscience, while Bailey slept nearby. One line from a behavioral research article stayed with him longer than anything else. The absence of stress behaviors does not necessarily indicate happiness. True emotional well-being in dogs is reflected through the presence of voluntary vulnerability. Ethan read the sentence 3 times. Voluntary vulnerability. Suddenly everything clicked together in his mind. The exposed belly while sleeping. The slow blinking. The relaxed stretching. The deep sighs. The calm independence during walks. Bailey was not simply behaving better. His nervous system was displaying trust openly because it no longer expected life to become unpredictable at any second. That realization changed the way Ethan understood dogs completely. Most people measure happiness in dogs by excitement because excitement is easy for humans to recognize. It is loud, visible, entertaining. But according to canine cognition experts, genuine emotional stability often looks almost boring from the outside. A dog who feels deeply safe does not need to constantly perform emotion. Their body stops asking survival questions every few minutes. They eat slowly. They rest deeply. They recover from surprises quickly. They explore without panic. They sleep without positioning themselves near exits. Ethan looked over at Bailey again and suddenly remembered the first time he ever heard Bailey bark in his sleep. It happened nearly 2 years after adoption. Ethan actually woke up confused because the sound startled him so much. Until then, Bailey's sleep had always been so light and guarded that he barely moved at all during the night. But dreaming deeply requires the nervous system to surrender awareness for a while. Researchers studying canine REM sleep patterns have found that dogs experiencing chronic stress often struggle to remain in restorative sleep long enough for healthy emotional processing. Ethan stared at Bailey lying peacefully beside the balcony while late afternoon sunlight flickered softly across the hardwood floor, and for the first time he understood something heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time. A truly good life for a dog is not measured by how excited they become when good things happen. It is measured by how completely their body learns to believe that bad things probably will not. The first snow of the year arrived 3 days later, covering the sidewalks outside Ethan's apartment in a thin layer of white that reflected the city lights long after sunset. Bailey stood near the window watching flakes drift past the glass with quiet curiosity, while Ethan wrapped himself in a gray sweatshirt and started making dinner in the kitchen. The apartment felt unusually peaceful that night. No television. No traffic noise pushing through the walls. Just the low hum of the heater and the soft clicking of Bailey's nails against the hardwood floor as he wandered slowly between rooms before eventually settling beside the couch. Ethan glanced over at him and smiled because Bailey had started doing something recently that still caught him off guard every time. He would choose the middle of the room now. Not corners. Not hidden spaces near walls or furniture. The middle. Animal behaviorists often explain that resting in exposed open areas is one of the clearest signs a dog feels psychologically secure in its environment because instinctively, vulnerable animals prefer protected positions whenever uncertainty exists. A dog lying openly in the center of a room is communicating something profound without making a sound. It means their brain no longer feels the need to calculate escape routes every few minutes. Ethan carried his plate over to the couch and sat down while snow continued falling outside. Bailey lifted his head briefly, watched Ethan for a moment, then let out one of those deep, slow sighs Ethan had come to recognize instantly. Not sadness. Not exhaustion. Contentment. The kind of exhale that only happens when the body believes it can finally loosen completely. Then Bailey did something else Ethan had never seen during their first years together. He rolled onto his back right there in the open room, paws relaxed loosely toward the ceiling while his chest rose and fell slowly beneath the warm apartment light. Ethan felt his throat tighten again because scientists who study canine trust behaviors often describe exposed belly sleeping as one of the highest forms of environmental confidence in dogs. The stomach contains vulnerable organs, and instinctively, most animals protect that area unless their nervous systems feel completely safe. But what hit Ethan hardest was not the posture itself. It was how ordinary Bailey made it look now. As if peace had quietly become normal. Ethan leaned back against the couch and suddenly remembered the very first night Bailey slept in the apartment years earlier. Bailey refused to leave the corner beside the kitchen table. Even after Ethan turned off all the lights, Bailey stayed awake watching the room for hours, flinching slightly any time pipes rattled inside the walls or footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Ethan remembered laying awake that night feeling helpless because no amount of soft blankets or gentle words seemed capable of reaching whatever fear Bailey carried inside him back then. But healing does not always happen dramatically. Sometimes it happens so slowly you only notice it years later when a dog finally falls asleep belly up in the center of the room during a snowstorm without worrying about the world anymore. Bailey twitched softly in his sleep while snow continued drifting outside the windows, and Ethan realized something beautiful then. Maybe dogs do not measure a good life by excitement, adventure, or even happiness the way humans do. Maybe for them, the greatest gift is simpler than that. Predictable love. Quiet safety. And enough peace to finally let go of the instinct to stay ready for things that never come. By late December, snow had settled permanently across the city, covering rooftops and sidewalks in a quiet layer of white that made everything outside Ethan's apartment feel slower and softer. Inside, the warmth from the heater wrapped through the rooms while Bailey slept near the Christmas tree. Lights glowing faintly in the corner of the living room. Ethan sat nearby with a blanket over his shoulders, watching Bailey the way people watch something fragile they are afraid to interrupt. It still amazed him how different peace looked once you learned how to recognize it. A few years earlier, Ethan thought being a good dog owner meant providing enough exercise, enough food, enough toys, enough affection. And those things mattered, of course. But now he understood that the deepest form of care is something quieter than most people realize. It is emotional predictability. It is becoming the kind of presence that allows another living creature to finally unclench from survival. Bailey shifted slightly in his sleep, legs twitching softly as if chasing something harmless through a dream, and Ethan smiled because there was a time when Bailey barely dreamed at all. Or maybe he did dream, but never deeply enough to show it. The nervous system cannot fully rest when it still expects interruption. Canine neurologists explain that animals experiencing chronic vigilance often remain partially alert even during sleep because the brain prioritizes monitoring over restoration. But Bailey slept deeply now. Completely. Like a dog whose body had finally learned that nighttime no longer required caution. Ethan looked around the apartment quietly. The same walls. The same furniture. The same routines they had shared for years. Nothing dramatic had changed. And yet everything had changed. Because somewhere between the morning walks, the predictable dinners, the quiet evenings on the couch, and the thousands of ordinary moments where nothing bad happened, Bailey's nervous system slowly began rewriting its understanding of the world. Not all at once. Not in some movie scene transformation. Just little by little. Day after day. Until safety stopped feeling temporary. Ethan remembered something he once read from an animal behavior researcher who said that trust in dogs is not built through intensity. It is built through repetition. Through calm mornings. Through gentle voices. Through coming home every single time you leave. Through proving over and over again that the world has become predictable enough to rest inside. Bailey opened his eyes slightly and looked toward Ethan for a moment before giving one slow blink and settling back to sleep without lifting his head. Experts often describe slow blinking in relaxed dogs as a social signal of emotional comfort because the dog willingly lowers awareness in the presence of someone they trust. Ethan felt his chest tighten again, but this time it was not sadness. It was gratitude. Because the older Bailey got, the more Ethan realized something most people completely miss about dogs. The greatest sign that a dog's life is truly good is not how wildly they celebrate joy. It is how completely they trust peace. And maybe that is true for people too. Maybe healing is not becoming louder or happier all the time. Maybe healing is simply reaching the point where your body finally believes it no longer has to prepare